Welcome back to Abyss of Crime. In today's chilling exploration, we delve into a case that shocked the world, revealing unimaginable depths of human cruelty and deception. This is the story of Joseph Fritzl, a man who lived a double life as a respectable member of society and a monstrous abuser hidden within the walls of his own home. His crimes, once uncovered, horrified not only his small Austrian community, but also the entire globe, leaving a permanent scar on the collective conscience. For over 2 decades, Fritzl kept his daughter, Elisabeth, imprisoned in a secret underground dungeon beneath his house, where he subjected her to unimaginable horrors. He fathered 7 children with her, 3 of whom were forced to live their entire lives in the darkness of the cellar, never seeing the light of day. The discovery of this hidden chamber and the revelation of what transpired within its confines exposed the darkest corners of human nature. Joseph Fritzl's heinous actions were concealed behind a veneer of normalcy. He crafted a public persona as a diligent and hard-working man, respected in his community. But beneath this facade lay a monstrous secret that would eventually be unveiled, shocking the world. Throughout this documentary, we will uncover the intricate details of Joseph Fritzl's life, exploring how he maintained his respectable image while harboring sinister secrets. We will delve into Elisabeth's childhood, the construction of the cellar, her abduction, and the unimaginable life she endured in captivity. We will also recount the birth and upbringing of her children in this grim environment, her attempts to escape, and the eventual discovery and rescue that brought this nightmarish chapter to an end. Join us as we navigate through the unsettling layers of the Joseph Fritzl case, a story of unimaginable cruelty, deception, and the indomitable spirit of survival that continues to haunt us all. Joseph Fritzl, born on April 9, 1935, in Amstetten, Austria, experienced a tumultuous childhood during World War II, marked by his father's abandonment and a strained relationship with his mother. Despite an unremarkable academic career, he became an engineer, a skill he would later use for sinister purposes. In the 1950s, he married Rosemarie, and together they had 7 children, including Elisabeth. Throughout his career, Fritzl maintained a facade of respectability. He held various jobs, including as an engineer and entrepreneur, and was known in his community as a diligent and hard-working man. He built a successful rental property business, further cementing his image as a responsible and upstanding citizen. However, beneath this veneer of normalcy lay a dark and controlling personality. Fritzl's authoritarian demeanor within his household hinted at the sinister depths of his character. He was known to be a strict disciplinarian, often exerting an oppressive influence over his family. This controlling nature would later manifest in the most horrifying ways, as he carefully planned and executed the construction of a secret cellar, where he would imprison his daughter Elisabeth for 24 long years. This background sets the stage for understanding the duality of Joseph Fritzl's life, a man who, on the surface, appeared to be a pillar of his community, while, in reality, he harbored unimaginable evil within the confines of his home. Joseph Fritzl was a master of duplicity, skillfully maintaining a facade of respectability while concealing his sinister private life. In the small town of Amstetten, Austria, Fritzl was perceived as a model citizen. He was a successful businessman, owning several properties and having a stable career in engineering. His outward image was one of a devoted husband and father, active in local affairs and often seen participating in community events. Fritzl's public persona was so convincing that those around him had no inkling of the horrors unfolding within his own home. He was known as a disciplinarian, but not to a degree that raised suspicion. To most, he was an unremarkable yet reliable figure, a man who contributed positively to society. His wife, Rosemarie, and their children were seen as a typical family, albeit one that kept to themselves more than others. Behind closed doors, however, Fritzl's reality was one of control and manipulation. He was a domineering presence, exerting absolute authority over his household. This control extended to the careful planning and construction of a hidden cellar beneath his property, a task that required both engineering skill and an unyielding commitment to secrecy. Over the course of several years, Fritzl constructed a labyrinthine dungeon, complete with soundproof walls and concealed entrances, ensuring that his dark deeds would remain undiscovered. To maintain this secrecy, Fritzl employed various tactics. He restricted access to certain areas of his home, even to his immediate family. He also created elaborate ruses, such as fabricating stories about Elisabeth running away to join a cult, to explain her disappearance. These false narratives served to divert attention and maintain the illusion of normalcy, allowing him to perpetuate his monstrous actions undetected for over 2 decades. Elisabeth Fritzl, born on April 6, 1966, was the fourth of 7 children. Her childhood was dominated by her father's oppressive control. Despite a strict and authoritarian household, Elisabeth showed resilience and a desire for independence. This oppressive upbringing set the stage for her later imprisonment. From an early age, her relationship with her father was marked by an oppressive dominance that foreshadowed the horrors to come. Joseph Fritzl's authoritarian rule extended to every aspect of family life, and Elisabeth, like her siblings, grew up in an environment of strict control and limited freedom. As a child, Elisabeth was described as quiet and reserved, traits likely reinforced by her father's intimidating presence. Joseph Fritzl's controlling behavior was evident in his rigorous enforcement of discipline and his insistence on absolute obedience. Any defiance was met with severe punishment, instilling a sense of fear and submission in his children. Elisabeth, being naturally compliant, became a primary target for her father's manipulative tendencies. Despite the oppressive atmosphere at home, Elisabeth showed signs of resilience and a desire for independence. She performed reasonably well in school and had dreams of escaping the stifling confines of her father's control. However, these aspirations were continually thwarted by Fritzl's overbearing influence. He monitored her movements closely, limiting her interactions with the outside world and ensuring that she remained within his sphere of influence. There were early signs of Fritzl's disturbing interest in Elisabeth. He would often single her out for special attention, which, in the context of his authoritarian rule, took on a sinister undertone. This behavior escalated as Elisabeth entered her teenage years, culminating in her father's decision to imprison her in the cellar he had constructed beneath their home. Elisabeth's childhood, overshadowed by her father's controlling and abusive nature, set the stage for the unimaginable ordeal she would later endure. Her early life was a precursor to the extreme isolation and suffering that awaited her, as Joseph Fritzl's dark desires manifested in the most horrifying way. The construction of the cellar beneath Joseph Fritzl's house was a meticulously planned and executed endeavor, reflecting his engineering skills and his dark, methodical nature. This hidden chamber, which would become Elisabeth's prison for 24 years, was not a hastily constructed dungeon, but a carefully designed underground complex. Fritzl began the construction in the late 1970s, long before he abducted Elisabeth. He obtained the necessary permits under the pretext of building a standard basement for storage. However, his true intentions were far more sinister. Over several years, he expanded this basement into a labyrinthine structure, complete with multiple rooms, soundproof walls, and concealed entrances. The construction involved digging by hand, pouring concrete, and installing ventilation systems to ensure that the cellar was habitable, albeit in the most minimal sense. To keep the construction a secret, Fritzl worked primarily at night, using noise-dampening equipment to prevent neighbors from hearing the sounds of digging and building. He controlled access to the basement strictly, even keeping his family in the dark about the true nature of his project. The entrance to the cellar was hidden behind a series of locked doors, accessible only through a secret code that Fritzl alone possessed. The cellar itself was a claustrophobic maze. It included a small kitchen, a bathroom, and several cramped sleeping quarters. The walls were reinforced to prevent sound from escaping, ensuring that Elisabeth's cries for help would go unheard. The space was devoid of natural light, creating an environment of perpetual darkness and isolation. Fritzl also installed a rudimentary electrical system to provide minimal lighting and power, further reinforcing the cellar's functionality as a long-term prison. Through careful planning and an unyielding commitment to secrecy, Joseph Fritzl created a hidden world beneath his home, where he could exercise complete control over his captive daughter, setting the stage for the unimaginable horrors that would follow. The events leading up to Elisabeth's abduction were marked by escalating control and manipulation by Joseph Fritzl. On August 28, 1984, the day of her abduction, Elisabeth was just 18 years old. Fritzl had been conditioning her for years through psychological manipulation and coercion. On that fateful day, he lured her into the cellar under the guise of helping him with a household task. Once Elisabeth was inside the cellar, Fritzl quickly overpowered her and forced her into a small, windowless room. He then locked the heavy door behind him, sealing her fate. Elisabeth's initial experiences in captivity were marked by utter disbelief and terror. She found herself in a dark, confined space with no means of escape and no way to communicate with the outside world. The realization of her predicament was a harrowing and soul-crushing moment. Fritzl wasted no time in asserting his dominance over Elisabeth. He told her that the cellar was her new home and that she would never see the outside world again. He stripped her of any semblance of autonomy, making it clear that he controlled every aspect of her existence. The psychological torment was immediate and relentless. Elisabeth was forced to grapple with the enormity of her situation, knowing that her father, the man who was supposed to protect her, was now her captor. In the initial days and weeks of her captivity, Elisabeth's physical conditions were appalling. The cellar was cold, damp, and devoid of basic amenities. She was given minimal food and water, just enough to keep her alive but far from sufficient to sustain her health. The isolation was compounded by the physical abuse she endured at the hands of her father, who would visit the cellar regularly to assert his control through violence and sexual assault. Elisabeth's initial experiences in captivity set the tone for the years of suffering that lay ahead. Her abduction was the beginning of a prolonged nightmare, orchestrated by a man whose cruelty knew no bounds. As the days turned into weeks and the weeks into years, Elisabeth's hope for rescue dwindled, replaced by a grim determination to survive in the face of unimaginable adversity. Elisabeth Fritzl's life in captivity was a harrowing existence, marked by extreme isolation, relentless abuse, and a constant struggle for survival. Locked away in the dark, dank confines of the cellar, she was completely cut off from the outside world, with only the occasional, terror-filled visits from her father, Joseph Fritzl, to break the monotony of her imprisonment. The physical conditions in the cellar were deplorable. The space was cramped and poorly ventilated, creating an environment that was both suffocating and unsanitary. Elisabeth slept on a thin mattress on the cold concrete floor, with only a few blankets to keep her warm. Her access to basic necessities such as food, water, and hygiene products was severely restricted. Fritzl provided just enough to keep her alive, but the quality and quantity were far from what anyone would consider humane. Elisabeth's psychological torment was equally, if not more, severe. Fritzl used a combination of physical violence and psychological manipulation to maintain his control over her. He would beat her into submission, and the sexual abuse was a routine part of her life in the cellar. The constant threat of violence and the unpredictable nature of Fritzl's visits kept Elisabeth in a perpetual state of fear and anxiety. Despite the overwhelming despair, Elisabeth displayed remarkable resilience. She developed various coping mechanisms to endure the relentless abuse. She focused on small daily routines to create a semblance of normalcy in an otherwise abnormal environment. She also kept a mental record of the days and years, a way to maintain her sense of self and connection to the passage of time. Over the years, Elisabeth's imprisonment took on another layer of complexity with the birth of her children. These births brought both hope and additional challenges. The presence of her children provided her with a purpose and a reason to survive. But it also meant that she had to find ways to care for them in the limited and harsh conditions of the cellar. Elisabeth's relationship with her captor was complex. Fritzl would sometimes bring toys, books, and other items for the children, creating a bizarre semblance of a family life within the confines of the cellar. However, these gestures were not acts of kindness, but rather tools of manipulation, designed to keep Elisabeth compliant and to maintain his control. Throughout her captivity, Elisabeth made several attempts to escape, but her efforts were thwarted by the impenetrable nature of the cellar and Fritzl's constant vigilance. The cellar was equipped with multiple locked doors, and Fritzl held the only key. Additionally, the soundproof walls ensured that any cries for help would go unheard by the outside world. Elisabeth's life in captivity was a testament to her incredible strength and resilience. Despite the unimaginable suffering, she managed to survive and protect her children, holding on to the hope that one day they would be free. Her ordeal lasted for 24 years, a period marked by relentless abuse and unimaginable hardship, but also by moments of profound courage and determination. The birth of Elisabeth Fritzl's children added a new and complex dimension to her life in captivity. Over the 24 years she was imprisoned, Elisabeth gave birth to 7 children, all fathered by her captor, Joseph Fritzl. These births occurred under conditions that were far from ideal, lacking any medical assistance or adequate facilities. Elisabeth's first child, Kirsten, was born in 1988, 4 years into her captivity. The birth took place in the cramped and unhygienic conditions of the cellar. Without any medical help, Elisabeth was forced to rely on her instincts and limited knowledge to deliver her baby. The experience was harrowing, both physically and emotionally. The presence of a newborn added a new layer of responsibility and anxiety, but it also provided Elisabeth with a renewed sense of purpose. Fritzl's reaction to the births was paradoxical. While he continued to abuse Elisabeth, he also took measures to ensure the survival of the children. He brought down basic supplies like baby formula, clothes, and toys, creating a bizarre and twisted semblance of a family environment. The conditions under which the children were raised were harsh and unforgiving. However, these actions were not driven by compassion, but by a need to maintain control and keep his dark secret hidden. The cellar was not designed to accommodate a growing family. Space was limited, and the lack of natural light and fresh air created an unhealthy living environment. Despite these challenges, Elisabeth did her best to care for her children, teaching them basic skills and providing as much emotional support as she could. 3 of the children, Lisa, Monica, and Alexander, were removed from the cellar by Fritzl and taken to live upstairs with him and his wife, Rosemarie. Fritzl fabricated elaborate stories to explain their sudden appearance, claiming that they had been left on his doorstep by Elisabeth, who he said had joined a cult. These children were raised in the relative freedom of the outside world, but they were still under Fritzl's control and part of his elaborate web of deceit. The remaining children, Kirsten, Stefan, and Felix, remained in the cellar with Elisabeth. Their lives were marked by extreme isolation and deprivation. They had no concept of the outside world, having never seen daylight or interacted with anyone other than their mother and grandfather. Despite these conditions, Elisabeth worked tirelessly to provide them with a sense of normalcy, creating a routine and educating them as best as she could. The births of the children and their subsequent lives in captivity highlighted the complex and twisted nature of Fritzl's crimes. While he ensured their survival, he also subjected them to a life of unimaginable suffering and deprivation. Elisabeth's ability to care for her children under such extreme conditions was a testament to her strength and resilience, providing a glimmer of hope in an otherwise dark and despairing situation. The children born in captivity to Elisabeth Fritzl endured a life of extreme deprivation and isolation, a dark and twisted upbringing orchestrated by their grandfather and father, Joseph Fritzl. The 3 children who remained in the cellar, Kirsten, Stefan, and Felix, knew nothing of the outside world. Their existence was confined to the small, airless rooms beneath the house, devoid of sunlight and fresh air. Kirsten, the eldest, was born in 1988 and spent nearly 2 decades in the cellar. She assumed a nurturing role, assisting her mother in caring for her younger siblings. Despite the oppressive conditions, Kirsten displayed remarkable resilience and maturity, traits undoubtedly influenced by Elisabeth's own strength and determination. Stefan, born in 1990, and Felix, born in 2002, shared a similar fate. Their childhoods were marked by a lack of freedom and the constant presence of fear, yet they found solace in the small joys of sibling companionship and the love of their mother. Elisabeth did her best to create a semblance of normalcy in an otherwise abnormal environment. She established routines for her children, teaching them to read and write using the limited materials available. She also ensured that they engaged in physical activities within the confined space, attempting to promote their physical and mental well-being. Elisabeth's efforts to provide an education and a sense of structure were acts of defiance against the oppressive reality imposed by Fritzl. Fritzl's interactions with the children involved a calculated mixture of provision and oppression. He would bring supplies and occasional gifts, creating an illusion of care. Despite this, his visits were often terrifying, filled with threats and abusive behavior, ensuring his control over the family. The children lived in constant fear, their psychological well-being severely impacted. Those who lived upstairs, unaware of their true origins, faced a different but equally controlling environment under Fritzl's authority. The children knew him as both their grandfather and father, a relationship that added another layer of psychological complexity to their already traumatic lives. The 3 children who were removed from the cellar, Lisa, Monica, and Alexander, experienced a different kind of upbringing. They lived upstairs with Fritzl and his wife, Rosemarie, who was unaware of their true parentage and origin. Fritzl fabricated stories about their mother, claiming that Elisabeth had abandoned them. The children's lives in captivity were a testament to human resilience in the face of unimaginable adversity. Elisabeth's unwavering love and determination to protect her children provided them with a glimmer of hope, even in the darkest of circumstances. Throughout her 24 years of captivity, Elisabeth Fritzl made several attempts to escape, driven by a desperate desire for freedom and a determination to protect her children. These attempts, however, were fraught with challenges and often met with severe consequences. One of the earliest known attempts occurred shortly after her initial imprisonment. Elisabeth tried to break through the locked doors that sealed the cellar, but the heavy reinforced barriers, designed by Fritzl himself, proved impenetrable. Her efforts were met with brutal retaliation from Fritzl, who used physical violence to reassert his control and discourage any further attempts at escape. Elisabeth's subsequent attempts were more covert. She devised plans to signal for help, such as creating noise in the hope that someone might hear and investigate. However, the soundproof nature of the cellar rendered these efforts futile. The isolation was absolute. Cries for help were swallowed by the thick, reinforced walls, ensuring that her pleas went unheard by the outside world. As the years passed and her children were born, Elisabeth's focus shifted to their well-being. She knew that any escape attempt would have to account for their safety as well. This added a layer of complexity to her plans. She could not risk their lives in a hasty or poorly planned escape. The stakes were too high, and Fritzl's unpredictability made any misstep potentially fatal. Despite the oppressive conditions, Elisabeth never lost hope entirely. She remained vigilant, always looking for potential opportunities to escape. She instructed her children to be prepared for the possibility of rescue, teaching them to remain calm and follow her lead if the chance ever arose. This mental preparation was crucial, as it kept the flame of hope alive, even in the darkest moments. The consequences of her escape attempts were severe. Each failure resulted in heightened surveillance and increased brutality from Fritzl. He used these moments to reinforce the futility of resistance, aiming to break her spirit and ensure her compliance. However, Elisabeth's resilience and determination were unyielding. Despite the physical and psychological toll, she continued to nurture the belief that one day they would be free. Elisabeth's attempts to escape were acts of incredible bravery and resilience. They highlighted her unwavering spirit and her refusal to succumb to the oppressive control of her captor. Her determination to protect her children and secure their freedom remained a beacon of hope, guiding her through the darkest years of her captivity. The breakthrough in the Joseph Fritzl case came in April 2008, a turning point that would bring an end to 24 years of unimaginable suffering for Elisabeth and her children. The police made public appeals for information about Elisabeth, who was still believed to have run away to join a cult. These appeals reached Elisabeth inside the cellar through news reports Fritzl occasionally allowed them to see. Realizing that this was a rare opportunity, Elisabeth pleaded with Fritzl to take her to the hospital under the guise of reuniting with Kerstin. On April 26, 2008, Fritzl relented, taking Elisabeth and her two sons, Stefan and Felix, out of the cellar for the first time in years. At the hospital, Elisabeth's behavior and appearance immediately raised alarms. The medical staff contacted the police, who quickly took Elisabeth into protective custody. Faced with mounting pressure, Elisabeth revealed her true identity and the horrific details of her captivity. She insisted on police protection before providing a full account, fearing retribution from her father. The police acted swiftly, arresting Joseph Fritzl later that same day. A search of his property uncovered the hidden cellar, revealing the extent of his monstrous actions. The discovery sent shockwaves through the small town of Amstetten and quickly made headlines around the world. The public was horrified by the revelations, struggling to comprehend the magnitude of the crimes committed behind closed doors. Authorities were equally stunned by the complexity and duration of the case. The logistics of the rescue operation were daunting. They had to ensure the safety and well-being of Elisabeth and her children, while preserving the crime scene for investigation. The children, who had never seen daylight or interacted with anyone outside their immediate family, required immediate medical and psychological care. The rescue operation was conducted with immense care and sensitivity. Elisabeth and her children were taken to a secure location, where they received medical attention and began the slow process of recovery. The authorities, meanwhile, began to piece together the evidence against Fritzl, uncovering a web of lies and deception that had allowed him to evade detection for so long. The initial reactions of the authorities and the public were a mix of shock, outrage, and disbelief. The case revealed the depths of human depravity, but also highlighted the resilience of the human spirit. Elisabeth's courage and determination to protect her children had finally led to their freedom, bringing an end to one of the most harrowing chapters in true crime history. The trial of Joseph Fritzl was a landmark case that captivated global attention, providing a chilling glimpse into the mind of a man capable of such unspeakable acts. The proceedings began on March 16, 2009, in the town of St. Pölten, Austria, with Fritzl facing a multitude of charges, including incest, rape, enslavement, coercion, and murder, by negligence for the death of one of the infants born in captivity. The courtroom was a somber place, filled with a palpable sense of tension and anticipation. Elisabeth Fritzl, despite the trauma she had endured, showed immense courage by agreeing to testify against her father. Her testimony was delivered through pre-recorded video to protect her from the emotional strain of facing Fritzl directly. Her detailed account of the abuse, the conditions in the cellar, and the birth and upbringing of her children provided compelling evidence that left little doubt about Fritzl's guilt. The prosecution presented a mountain of evidence, including DNA tests that confirmed Fritzl as the father of Elisabeth's children, blueprints of the cellar, and personal diaries kept by Elisabeth. These diaries, written in secret during her captivity, documented the daily horrors she faced and served as a powerful testament to her ordeal. The evidence painted a comprehensive picture of Fritzl's calculated and methodical approach to his crimes, leaving the jury with a clear understanding of the extent of his depravity. Fritzl's defense attempted to mitigate his culpability by arguing that he had provided for his captive family and had not intended to harm them. They also presented psychological evaluations, suggesting that Fritzl suffered from a severe personality disorder, which they claimed diminished his responsibility for his actions. However, these arguments did little to sway the jury, who were confronted with overwhelming evidence of his guilt. The psychological evaluations of Fritzl revealed a man with a deeply disturbed personality, characterized by narcissism, a lack of empathy, and a need for absolute control. These traits were evident in his meticulous planning and execution of the cellar, as well as his ability to maintain a facade of normalcy in his public life. The evaluations underscored the calculated nature of his crimes, reinforcing the prosecution's case. On March 19, 2009, after just 4 days of deliberation, the jury returned a unanimous verdict of guilty on all charges. Fritzl was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for 15 years, a sentence that reflected the severity of his crimes and the lasting impact on his victims. The trial of Joseph Fritzl was a moment of justice for Elisabeth and her children, bringing an end to their long nightmare. It also served as a stark reminder of the potential for evil that can lurk behind closed doors, hidden beneath the veneer of respectability. Elisabeth's bravery in facing her tormentor and recounting her harrowing experiences was a testament to her resilience and strength, offering a glimmer of hope and healing in the aftermath of unimaginable suffering. Thank you for watching Abyss of Crime. Please support us by subscribing and hitting the bell icon to stay updated. Keep watching for more cases that explore the darkest corners of human nature. Stay vigilant and keep seeking the truth. Goodbye.